I used to think family meant unconditional love. That no matter how badly life fell apart, your parents would always be your anchor. But standing in that courtroom months later, watching them roll their eyes like I was some embarrassment, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. My name is Isabella Hart, I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I was the quiet one. The one who didn't argue, didn't talk back, didn't ask for too much. My mother, Elaine, used to say I was pleasantly invisible, as if that were a compliment. My father, Martin, would just nod along, reading his paper like he wasn't even in the same room. But that invisibility came with a cost. You start believing you're only loved when you're useful, or when you don't take up too much space. I grew up in a middle-class home in Portland, Oregon. My parents owned a small real estate agency, and from the outside, we looked perfect. Sunday brunches, Christmas cards, coordinated family photos. But behind those walls, it was different. My parents were calculating. Every decision, every conversation felt like a performance, something to maintain the illusion of success. And when you're the daughter who doesn't fit their script, you become a problem they want to fix. My older brother, Ethan, was their golden child, charismatic, ambitious, the one they pinned all their hopes on. He joined the family business right after college, while I pursued law. My parents said law was a bit too opinionated for someone like me. They wanted me in something quieter, something that wouldn't challenge them. Teaching, maybe. But I had spent too long being quiet. Law gave me a voice. It gave me purpose. And that, to them, was threatening. At 26, I was working as a junior associate in a small firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I loved the structure of it, the way truth could be built piece by piece, like a puzzle. But that same year, my father offered me an investment opportunity in his company. He said it was a family trust, a chance to secure my future. I didn't ask too many questions. I wanted to believe him. I wanted, for once, to be part of something they were proud of. I signed the documents he gave me, without realizing what they truly meant. And that was my first mistake. A few months later, my firm got a call from a client, a woman who had been defrauded in a real estate deal. I was assigned to the case. When I looked through the file, my stomach turned. The company name on the documents was Hart and Associates Realty. My parents' company. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a coincidence. But when I dug deeper, the evidence was undeniable. Falsified property values, double-signed contracts, and the signature authorizing the transfer?
Mine.
The shock hit me like a punch to the chest. My father had used my name, my trust, to commit fraud. I confronted him the same night. He was sitting in his leather chair, sipping whiskey, looking perfectly calm. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking, "why is my name on those contracts?" He didn't even flinch. He just looked up from his glass and said, "Because you're part of the company now, sweetheart. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" I repeated, barely able to breathe. "You used my signature on fake documents. That's fraud, Dad." He chuckled. "Don't be dramatic. It's just business. You're overreacting." When I turned to my mom, hoping for even a shred of support, she just sighed. "Isabella," she said, "you've always had a flair for exaggeration. Your father knows what he's doing. Just let it go. Let it go." That was their solution to everything: lie, manipulate, and when someone called it out, let it go. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at our house, realizing that everything I believed about my family, about loyalty, about trust, was built on lies. I didn't go to the police immediately. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I still loved them. I thought maybe I could reason with them, that maybe they'd fix it quietly. But the next week, my law firm received a subpoena. Someone had reported me as the main perpetrator of the fraud. They framed me. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely function. I remember sitting on my apartment floor, staring at the legal notice, my heart pounding in my ears. My parents had turned me into the scapegoat to protect themselves and their golden son. Ethan called me that night, pretending to care. "Izzy, Mom and Dad are just trying to contain the damage," he said. "You signed those papers. Technically, it's on you. But don't worry, they'll make sure you don't go to jail. Are you hearing yourself? I said. They destroyed my career. My reputation. He sighed. You always make things about yourself. Maybe if you'd been more involved in the family business, you'd understand. That was the moment I realized they had never seen me as family. I was just a tool. Something they could use when convenient, then discard when I became inconvenient. I lost my job 2 weeks later. The firm said they had to distance themselves from the situation. My apartment lease was under review because of my pending case. Even friends stopped answering my calls. It was like my name had become radioactive. I hit rock bottom. For months, I kept quiet. I didn't post online. I didn't respond to anyone. But inside, something started to change. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a quiet, steady resolve. I started reviewing every document I had ever signed for my father's company. I collected bank statements, email records, meeting notes, anything that could prove what they did. I taught myself how to build a defense case piece by piece. And slowly, the picture became clear. My parents had been using fake shell companies to inflate property values. Ethan signed deals through third-party buyers, and when the fraud caught up to them, they pinned it on me. They thought I'd be too naive, too emotional, to fight back. They were wrong. When my court date was set, I didn't tell anyone. I walked in alone, wearing the same gray blazer I wore the day I passed my bar exam, a reminder of who I was before they tried to destroy me. As soon as I entered the courtroom, I saw them, my parents, sitting in the front row. My mother rolled her eyes like I was some melodramatic child. My father smirked. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, looking bored. But when the judge called my name and I placed my evidence on the table, 3 thick binders of proof meticulously organized, the room went silent. The judge looked at me, then at them. "Ms. Hart," he said, "are you representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. My voice didn't shake. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, impressed. "Very well. Proceed." That was the moment everything shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was Isabella Hart, the woman who refused to be destroyed by the people who claimed to love her. And as I began to speak, to lay out the truth piece by piece, I saw something flicker in my parents' eyes. Not guilt, not fear, but disbelief. They finally realized that the daughter they dismissed had become the one person they couldn't control. When I stood at that courtroom podium, my hands didn't shake. Not because I wasn't scared, I was terrified, but because fear had stopped being useful months ago. Fear was what kept me silent, what made me sign papers without asking questions, what made me trust people who saw me as disposable. I'd lived in fear my whole life. That day, I decided to live in truth instead. The courtroom was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint rustle of papers. My parents sat together, perfectly composed. My mother's posture was rigid, her hair twisted into the same neat bun she always wore at church, pretending to be the picture of respectability. My father, Martin, had his arms crossed, wearing his expensive gray suit, the one I used to think made him look powerful. Now, I just saw arrogance. And Ethan? He sat beside them, whispering something that made them all smirk. I wanted to hate them, but hatred is heavy. What I felt was sharper, colder clarity. "Your Honor," I began, "I've spent the last 6 months collecting evidence that proves I was not only unaware of these fraudulent activities, but that my signature was forged on several critical documents." My mother's jaw tightened. My father's smirk faltered for the briefest second. I continued, my voice steady. "The defendants, my parents, Martin and Elaine Hart, used my professional status as a licensed attorney to add legitimacy to their illegal deals. They exploited my trust, my name, and my career to protect themselves from scrutiny." The prosecutor, a stern-looking man named David Loring, adjusted his glasses and stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Hart is not a licensed representative in this matter. She's a defendant." The judge raised an eyebrow. "She's representing herself, Counselor. The objection is overruled. Let her continue." David glared at me. My heart raced, but I kept my gaze on the judge. "I've provided the court with verified handwriting analyses," I said, gesturing to the binders. "You'll see clear inconsistencies between my actual signature and the ones on the property transfer documents." The judge flipped through the first binder, his eyes narrowing as he compared the papers. "This is compelling," he murmured. For the first time, I saw my mother shift uncomfortably. She whispered something to my father, who clenched his jaw. Inside, I felt something uncoil, the faintest whisper of satisfaction. They weren't in control anymore. But this wasn't about revenge yet. This was about survival. The hearing continued for hours. Every document, every accusation, every lie they'd told was dissected. My father tried to interrupt several times, claiming I was confused or emotional. The judge warned him twice to remain silent. My mother tried tears, crocodile tears, but the evidence spoke louder than her performance ever could. At one point, the prosecutor tried to corner me. "Miss Hart, are you saying your parents committed these acts without your knowledge? That you, a trained attorney, had no idea what was happening in a company you supposedly co-owned?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because when you're raised by people who manipulate the truth as easily as they breathe, it's very easy to mistake deceit for love." A few people in the courtroom murmured. Even the judge glanced up, his expression thoughtful. By the end of the session, the judge ordered a recess. My evidence had opened enough doubt that he postponed the final verdict pending further review. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a crack in their armor. As I packed my files, my mother's voice sliced through the silence. "You've embarrassed us enough, Isabella." I turned to her slowly.
"No, Mom."
"You embarrassed yourselves. I'm just cleaning up the mess." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. My father, though, he smirked again, leaning closer. "You think you've won something? You've got no idea how this world works, sweetheart. The law can't save you." I stepped closer until we were eye to eye. "Then maybe the truth will." He laughed quietly. "Truth is what powerful people say it is. Remember that." He walked off with my mother and Ethan following behind, heads high like they were still untouchable. But they weren't untouchable anymore. Not to me. That night, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by papers, files, and half-empty coffee cups. The city lights flickered outside my window, reflecting off the rain-slick streets. My mind replayed every word, every look from that day. For the first time, I realized something terrifying. They weren't going to stop. My parents would keep manipulating, keep twisting the narrative until I broke. So I decided not to break. Instead, I started to dig deeper, beyond the fraud case, beyond the paperwork. I went back through years of financial records, pulling data from old servers, tracing money through hidden accounts. I found offshore transfers, shell corporations, and connections to shady developers. It wasn't just one fraudulent deal, it was a pattern, a network. My father wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting people far more powerful. Every discovery made me feel a mix of fury and power. For years, they treated me like I was naive. But now I had something stronger than innocence. I had knowledge. And knowledge, in the right hands, was power. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Detective Alvarez, one of the investigators assigned to the case. "Ms. Hart," she said, "we've reviewed the evidence you submitted. It's strong. But if what you're suggesting is true, this goes beyond your parents' company." "I know," I said quietly. "And I have proof." She hesitated. "Then we'll need you to testify again. This could turn into a federal case." My stomach twisted. It was one thing to defend myself, another to bring down my entire family. But as I sat there, staring at the box of childhood photos on my shelf, smiling faces, fake happiness, I knew there was no turning back. They had chosen this path. I was just walking it to the end. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights, interviews, and endless documents. I worked with Alvarez to piece together the timeline. We uncovered money laundering, falsified audits, and tax evasion, all under the Hart family name. When the news broke, it hit like wildfire. Local headlines screamed, Real estate empire under investigation. Family at center of fraud scandal. And there it was, my parents' faces on every news channel, my father's smug expression replaced with cold panic. Ethan's perfect reputation as the golden son started to crumble. The same relatives who once bragged about us at dinner parties now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. But I didn't feel joy. Not yet. What I felt was freedom. The kind that comes from finally being seen for who you are, not who they made you to be. One night, as I left the courthouse after another long hearing, I saw Ethan waiting by my car. His expression was dark, his jaw tight. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "You're ruining everything." I laughed bitterly. "Everything was already ruined, Ethan. You just didn't notice." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think the world will believe you? You're the one who signed everything. You're the one who worked at the law firm. Mom and Dad said you're just bitter because you were never good enough." I stared at him for a long time, then said softly, "Maybe I wasn't good enough for them, but I'm good enough to bring them down." He froze. I could see the fear behind his anger. The realization that the little sister he used to mock was now the biggest threat they'd ever faced. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Tell Mom and Dad I'm not scared anymore." He didn't respond. He just walked away, his shoulders tense. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and looked out the window at the city skyline. The rain was falling again, tapping softly against the glass. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to make them proud. Every forced smile, every compromise, every quiet ache. And I realized something I should have known all along. Some families don't deserve forgiveness. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about justice and finally reclaiming the power they stole from me. The day my parents' names appeared on the front page of the city newspaper, I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. The headline screamed, "Power couple Martin and Elaine Hart accused of massive fraud. Daughter testifies against them." I sat at my kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's blazer, staring at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. My coffee had gone cold. My phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, colleagues, old classmates who suddenly remembered my number. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. What they didn't understand was that behind every headline, there's a person who bleeds quietly. I was that person. When I got to work that morning, whispers followed me down the hallway. I could feel the eyes of every associate and intern trail behind me as if I was some sort of living scandal. The once friendly receptionist gave me a look that lingered somewhere between pity and curiosity. "Hey, Isabella," my colleague Jason said softly, catching up to me. "Rough morning." I forced a tired smile. "Something like that." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, I believe you. Everyone in the firm knows you're not like them." That sentence, "not like them," hit me like a strange kind of compliment. For so long, I had been desperate to be like them, to make my father proud, to earn my mother's approval. Now I was finally free from their shadow, but freedom came wrapped in loneliness. By noon, my inbox was flooded with requests for comment. A local news station wanted to interview me. A legal blog asked for an anonymous quote. My boss called me into his office, an older man named Richard with kind eyes and a cautious tone. "Isabella," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "I need to ask if you plan on staying with the firm while this case continues." I blinked. "Are you asking me to leave?" He sighed.
No.
"But this is going to get messy. The firm's name is on several of the contracts in question, even if you weren't involved. We can't afford bad press." I looked down at my trembling hands. "So you're saying I'm a liability?" "I'm saying you're in a fight bigger than you realize," he said gently. "And I'm not sure anyone wins in this kind of war."
War.
That word stuck in my head all day, because that's exactly what it had become. That evening, I returned home to find a bouquet of lilies on my doorstep, my mother's favorite flower. A small card was tucked inside. It read, "We didn't raise you to be this cruel." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. I crumpled the card and tossed it into the trash, though my hands were shaking. The scent of lilies filled the room, heavy and suffocating. They wanted to remind me that even from disgrace, they still held power, that I'd never escape the emotional chokehold they'd built over decades. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices, my mother's cold disappointment, my father's mocking laugh, Ethan's condescending tone. It was like they were sitting in my apartment, haunting the space. By 3 a.m., I gave up trying to rest. I sat at my desk, pulled out my files again, and stared at the evidence. I thought about what Detective Alvarez said the week before: this could go federal. If it did, everything would change. Not just for my parents, but for everyone tied to them. The family friends, the investors, even the politicians who'd once smiled in our family photos. That realization scared me, but it also gave me purpose. Because if they had built an empire on lies, I was going to dismantle it piece by piece. The next morning, Alvarez called me in. Her office was small, cluttered with boxes and case files. She looked tired but determined. "Isabella, we've verified several of the offshore accounts you mentioned," she said, sliding a file across the table. "Your father's company moved over $3 million through shell corporations last year. We're linking them to fraudulent property acquisitions." I felt my throat tighten. That's huge."
It is," she said.
"But there's something else. One of the accounts was created under your name." I froze. "What?" She nodded grimly. "A fake identity tied to your credentials. It looks like they were setting you up as the fall person if anything ever went wrong." The room spun for a moment. My parents hadn't just betrayed me. They'd planned for it. I wasn't an accidental casualty. I was their insurance policy. My hands curled into fists. So they wanted me to take the fall all along. Alvarez's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Isabella, but now we can prove it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the file, the black ink blurring as tears filled my eyes. It was one thing to suspect betrayal, another to see it printed in hard evidence. "They knew I'd never question them," I whispered. "They knew I'd sign whatever they put in front of me." Alvarez nodded. "And they used that against you. But we can make it right." Something inside me broke then, not from pain, but from resolve. That night, I sat alone on my couch, watching the rain streak across the window. I remembered being 12, sitting at the dinner table as my father lectured me about loyalty. "Family comes first, Isabella," he'd say. "No matter what, you protect your own." And I had believed him, until I realized that in our family, protecting your own meant protecting the lies that kept them powerful. I thought of every sacrifice, every time I stayed late at the office to impress him, every time I swallowed my opinions to avoid his temper, every time my mother told me to smile more because good daughters don't challenge their parents. I was done being the good daughter. 2 days later, the next hearing was scheduled. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras ready. My parents arrived looking immaculate, as if they were attending a charity gala instead of a fraud hearing. My father gave me a condescending nod. My mother didn't look at me at all. Ethan smirked from his seat beside them. The judge entered, and everyone stood. My heart pounded as the proceedings began. David Loring, the prosecutor, tried to paint me as a complicit insider again. But this time, I had something new, evidence of the forged identity. When I handed the document to the judge, the room went dead silent. He examined it carefully. "This account was opened using Ms. Hart's identification number, but the handwriting does not match her signature. And the address listed," he paused, "is her parents' corporate office." My father's face went pale. My mother shifted in her chair, her composure cracking. David stammered. This could be a clerical error." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Loring, this is serious. It appears the defendants may have falsified financial records in their own daughter's name." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Cameras clicked furiously. I sat there, silent, as the weight of years of manipulation began to tip against them. My father finally snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "You don't understand, Judge. She's trying to destroy us because she's bitter. We built everything for her." The judge's tone turned cold. Then why does the evidence suggest you tried to destroy her instead? That sentence, that one sentence, was the first time someone of authority had seen through them. It was the moment my truth stopped being a whisper and became undeniable. When the hearing adjourned, reporters swarmed me outside the courthouse. "Isabella, how do you feel about your parents' charges? Do you have a statement for the press? Is it true you're cooperating with federal investigators?" I didn't answer any of them. I just looked straight ahead and said quietly, "Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth finally being louder than lies." That quote ended up on headlines the next day. And for once, I didn't mind. Because the truth was louder now, and my parents were finally hearing it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The higher the stakes rose, the dirtier they'd play. And the closer we got to the final verdict, the more dangerous the game would become. The days that followed the hearing felt strangely quiet, like the air after a storm that hasn't decided if it's over. My mom stopped calling. My dad didn't text. The house felt emptier than ever. Though, ironically, I'd been living alone for months. Silence became my new normal, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that hums beneath your skin, reminding you that something's missing, even if it's something toxic. I tried to distract myself with work. I took on extra projects, stayed late, and even volunteered to mentor the new hires. But no matter how much I kept busy, my thoughts drifted back to that courtroom, to my mother's cold stare, my father's dismissive sigh, and that haunting question the judge asked, "Why would loving parents do this?" I didn't have the answer then, but I wanted to find it. One evening, about a week later, I sat on my couch, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold. My laptop was open to a blank email draft. The cursor blinked, waiting. I wanted to write to them, to ask why, to beg for an explanation. But every time I tried, my fingers froze. What could I possibly say? Why don't you love me? Why wasn't I ever enough? Those weren't questions you emailed. Those were the kind that either broke you open or finally set you free. Instead, I opened a new document and began typing something else entirely. A timeline. From the first time I noticed how my mom treated me differently from my brother, to the countless times she took credit for my achievements, to the inheritance betrayal that shattered everything. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for me. My way of trying to make sense of chaos. But the more I wrote, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about greed. It was about control. My mother had spent her life manipulating everyone around her, my father, my brother, even me. And now that I was independent, financially stable, and unwilling to bend, she couldn't stand it. She needed to remind me who held the power. The realization didn't make it hurt any less, but it gave me something precious. Perspective. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call. "Miss Parker?" The voice on the other end was polite, formal. "This is Helen Crawford, from Judge O'Neill's office. He asked me to reach out to you. Would you be available to come in for a brief follow-up?" My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? Not at all. The judge simply wanted to discuss a few details related to your parents' case and your statement. It won't take long. I agreed to meet the next morning. When I arrived at the courthouse, the same heavy doors greeted me, but this time, I walked through them with my head high. My palms still sweated, my pulse still quickened, but I wasn't the same person who'd walked in weeks ago. I'd learned that love without respect was just manipulation in disguise. Judge O'Neill's assistant led me to his office. The judge looked up from a stack of papers, his expression softening when he saw me. "Anna, good to see you again," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "Please sit." I did. "You wanted to talk about the case?" "Yes, partly," he replied, leaning back slightly. "I also wanted to tell you that I reviewed the follow-up evidence regarding your parents' financial handling of the trust. It appears there's more to it than we initially thought." My heart skipped. "More?" He nodded. "Your father's signature on one of the trust documents was forged. We have handwriting experts confirming that. The implications are serious." I sat frozen, trying to process. "Forged? So, my mother?" "Most likely, yes," he said gently. "The court will open a separate investigation. You won't have to testify again for now, but your cooperation may be needed later. I felt my throat tighten. She forged his signature to take money from her own daughter. Judge O'Neill's gaze softened. I've seen many families torn apart over inheritance disputes, but few as tragic as yours. You're handling it with remarkable grace. I wanted to laugh at that. Grace wasn't what I felt. I felt raw, like someone had peeled away my skin and left only nerves. But I managed a small nod. Thank you. Before I left, the judge added, Anna, may I offer some personal advice? Of course. Don't let this define you. You've been wronged, yes, but you've also proven that you can stand up for yourself. Use that strength for something that builds, not just something that hurts. His words stayed with me long after I walked out of that courthouse. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed everything: the forged signature, the lies, the years of emotional neglect. I wanted to call my father to ask if he knew, but a small, honest part of me feared the answer. What if he did? What if he'd let her do it? Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my brother, Ethan. Anna, we need to talk. Mom's losing it. Dad's threatening to call you. Please answer. I stared at the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something about the way he said losing it made me uneasy. Against my better judgment, I called him. Ethan? He answered instantly. Anna, thank God. Listen, Mom's freaking out. She got a letter about the investigation. She thinks you reported her. I didn't, I said flatly. The court found it on their own. I know that, he said quickly. But you know how she gets. She's tearing through the house, yelling about how you're trying to ruin her life. I rubbed my temples. She forged Dad's signature. She ruined her own life. I'm not saying you're wrong, he muttered. But she's saying things. About you. About why you deserve this. I laughed bitterly. Of course she is. He hesitated. Anna, can I be honest? I think she's scared. Not just of the court, but of losing control. You were the only person she couldn't manipulate anymore. That makes you dangerous to her. That was the most insight I'd ever heard from Ethan about our mother. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. So what do I do? Honestly? He sighed. Stay away. Let her deal with the fallout. She's going to blame you no matter what. For once, I listened. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. I didn't hear from my parents directly, though rumors reached me through distant relatives, whispers about how Anna betrayed her family, how she took them to court for money. None of it surprised me. My mother was rewriting the story, just like she always had. But I didn't feel the need to defend myself anymore. The truth was already working its way into the light, piece by piece. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I saw a familiar figure standing outside the building. My father. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped, and when he turned toward me, his eyes weren't angry. They were tired. Dad, I said, stopping a few feet away. Hi, Anna, he said quietly. For a moment, we just stood there, the city noise filling the space between us. Then he spoke again. I wanted to see you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear this from me. I braced myself. I knew about the trust, he admitted. Not about the forgery, that was your mother. But I knew she was shifting funds. She told me it was temporary, that she'd fix it before anyone noticed. Why didn't you stop her? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked down. Because it was easier not to fight her. She always won. And I was tired of being the bad guy. My chest ached. So, you let me be the bad guy instead. He nodded faintly. Yes, I did. There it was. The quiet confession I'd been craving and dreading all at once. I'm sorry, Anna, he whispered. Truly. I wanted to scream. To tell him that sorry didn't erase years of neglect or betrayal. But instead, I said the only thing that felt right. I believe you're sorry. I just wish you'd been brave when it mattered. He nodded again, eyes glistening. So do I. And then he turned and walked away. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something had shifted. I didn't feel relief, not exactly. But I felt lighter. like I'd been holding my breath for years, and finally exhaled. My mother's world was crumbling, my father's guilt was catching up to him, and I, after everything, was still standing. Maybe that was my victory. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just survival. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The morning after I saw my father, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close. The kind of quiet that comes after you've stopped chasing answers from people who'll never give them. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up angry. I made myself breakfast, watered the dying fern by my window, and even smiled a little when the sun slipped through the blinds. But clarity has a funny way of pulling old wounds back into focus. Because the moment I checked my email, I saw a new message with the subject line, "Court summons, follow-up hearing, Parker versus Parker." I stared at it for a long moment, my fork still in hand. The court had officially filed charges against my mother for document forgery and misappropriation of funds. I wasn't required to testify again, but I'd been listed as an affected party and invited to attend.
Part of me didn't want to go.
I'd already had my moment of truth in that courtroom, already seen my parents' eyes roll when I walked in, already felt that cold wall of indifference slam between us. But another part of me, one that had grown stronger in the weeks since, wanted to see this through. So I went. The courthouse was quieter this time, almost empty. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me as I walked down the hallway, my heels echoing against the tile. I wore a navy blue pantsuit and my hair in a simple bun, nothing fancy, just clean, confident, and deliberate. When I entered the courtroom, my parents were already there. My father sat rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother, on the other hand, looked furious. Not defeated, furious. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they'd gone white, and when her gaze met mine, there was no trace of remorse. Only rage. She looked at me the way a queen looks at a traitor. The judge, a different one this time, called the room to order. The hearing wasn't dramatic, it was mostly procedural. Evidence was reviewed, expert testimony confirmed the forgery, and my mother's attorney tried, unsuccessfully, to argue that she'd signed the papers under stress. But the moment that struck me most wasn't legal, it was emotional. When the prosecutor presented the forged document and held it up for verification, my mother snapped. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, slamming her hands on the table. "That girl," she pointed straight at me, voice trembling, "she's behind this. She's been trying to destroy me for years." The entire courtroom froze. The judge's expression didn't change, but his tone turned sharp. "Mrs. Parker, you will contain yourself." But she didn't stop. "She's always been jealous. Of her brother, of me, of everything. You think she's some innocent little victim? She's a manipulator. She—" "Enough." The judge's gavel came down hard, the sound cracking through the room. "If you continue this behavior, I will hold you in contempt of court." My mother's chest heaved as she sank back into her seat, her face flushed with fury. My father didn't look up once. I sat there, hands trembling in my lap, trying to hold my composure. It was one thing to be betrayed, it was another to watch the person who raised you tear at your character just to save herself. When the hearing ended, I left quickly, avoiding my parents. But as I stepped outside, I felt a sudden wave of nausea. The adrenaline, the memories, the years of emotional damage, it all hit at once. I sat on the courthouse steps, head in my hands, trying to breathe. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Miss Parker?" I looked up. It was Helen Crawford, the same woman from Judge O'Neill's office. She smiled softly. "The judge asked me to give you this." She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Anna, sometimes justice is louder than we expect, and sometimes it's quiet, but it still changes things. Don't underestimate what you've done. Standing up for yourself is never small. O'Neill." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto the paper. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild, not just my routine but myself. I started going to therapy again, something I hadn't done since my early 20s when I'd first begun noticing how much my mother's approval controlled me. I told my therapist everything: how my parents made me feel invisible, how I spent my adult life trying to earn love that was never real, and how the courtroom had become both a battlefield and a mirror. She listened quietly, then said something that stuck with me. "You didn't lose a family, Anna. You lost an illusion. What's left now is truth, and that's painful, but it's solid. You can build on that." I thought about those words often. At work, people started noticing I'd changed. My confidence was quieter but steadier. When a colleague tried to take credit for my report, I didn't shrink back. I called it out, calmly but firmly. And when my boss asked me to lead a new team, I didn't hesitate. Some nights, though, the pain still returned. Not in sharp bursts, but in soft waves, the kind that make you stare at the ceiling and wonder why the people who were supposed to love you most turned into your biggest source of hurt. One of those nights, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Anna?" The voice was faint, hoarse. "My father."
Dad.
I just wanted to say thank you," he said, "for not hating me. I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to be better." My throat tightened. "How are you?" "Your mother's angry," he said quietly. "She's blaming everyone but herself. But she's scared, too. I think she knows it's over. I'm staying with Ethan for now." I hesitated. "And you?" "I'm filing for separation," he admitted. "It's long overdue." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. Why now? Why not when it mattered most? But another part of me, the one that had grown tired of hating, just said, "Good." We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I didn't feel closure, not exactly, but I did feel something better: distance. A healthy kind of distance. Weeks turned into months. My mother's case went to trial, but I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The outcome didn't matter as much anymore. I had finally learned that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about freedom. And I was finally free. Still, there was one thing I hadn't done yet: visit my childhood home. It was a crisp Sunday morning when I finally drove there. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint a little faded, the garden overgrown. Standing on that familiar driveway felt like stepping into a memory that no longer belonged to me. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, breathing it in, the good, the bad, the echoes of laughter that had once felt real. I whispered, goodbye, not to the house, but to the girl who used to beg for love there. And then I turned and walked away. That night, I wrote a letter I never sent. Mom, I hope someday you understand what you did. I hope you realize that control isn't love, and silence isn't respect. I used to think forgiveness meant letting you back into my life. But now I know it means letting you go. I don't hate you. I just don't need you anymore. Your daughter, Anna. I folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'd mail it. Or maybe it was enough that I'd written it. As I turned off the light that night, a strange calm settled over me. My story wasn't one of revenge. It was one of reclamation. I hadn't destroyed my parents, but I'd stopped letting them destroy me. And maybe that's the quietest, strongest kind of justice there is. A month after I visited my childhood home, I got an email that caught me completely off guard. The subject line simply read, "Request for mediation. Parker Family Estate." I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers frozen above the keyboard. Inside was a formal notice from a law firm. Apparently, my mother's assets were being divided due to her ongoing legal situation. The letter stated that, as her daughter and next of kin, I was entitled to attend a mediation session to discuss the family estate. I almost laughed. My mother, the same woman who'd forged my name to take what she wanted, now had lawyers distributing her assets as if fairness had ever been part of her vocabulary. But curiosity won over bitterness. I agreed to attend, not for the money, but for the closure I hadn't realized I still needed. The mediation took place in a sterile office downtown, the kind of place that smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. A long glass table stretched through the middle of the room, surrounded by uncomfortable chairs. I arrived early, wanting a moment to breathe before facing them again. When they walked in, it was like time froze. My mother entered first, wearing a cream blazer and dark sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture screamed defiance. My father followed behind her, shoulders slumped, looking like a shadow of himself. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then the mediator, a calm woman in her 50s, cleared her throat. "Let's begin." The session started with numbers, properties, bank accounts, cold, detached things. But beneath every figure was a storm of history and resentment. My mother's attorney made her sound like a victim, while my father's lawyer emphasized her poor judgment. I listened quietly, hands folded, saying nothing. It wasn't until the mediator turned to me that the room truly shifted. "Miss Parker," she said gently, "your mother's trust includes several assets under your name. Would you like to discuss how you wish to proceed?" My mother stiffened beside her lawyer. "That's not necessary," she snapped. "She has no right to anything." Those were. "Mrs. Parker," the mediator interrupted, her tone firm. "Please let your daughter speak." I looked at my mother, then really looked at her. The woman who'd once seemed invincible now looked fragile beneath the makeup and tailored clothes. Her power had always come from control, and now that she couldn't control me, she didn't seem to know who she was. "I don't want her money," I said quietly. "I never did." The room went silent. My father looked up for the first time, eyes red-rimmed. "Anna, I just want this to be over," I continued. "Whatever you think I'm owed, give it to charity. Maybe something that helps women rebuild their lives." The mediator nodded slowly, jotting down notes. My mother's face twisted with disbelief. "You're doing this to humiliate me," she hissed. I met her eyes.
No.
"I'm doing this so I can finally walk away." For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind her anger. Not fear of punishment, but fear of irrelevance. The session ended soon after. As everyone gathered their papers, my father approached me hesitantly. "I meant what I said before," he murmured. "I'm leaving her. I should have done it years ago." I looked at him, and, for the first time, didn't see the man who failed to protect me. I saw someone who was finally trying. "I hope you do," I said softly. "For your sake." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "And yours, Anna. You deserved better than us." As I walked out of the office, the weight I'd been carrying for years seemed to loosen a little more. That night, I went home and sat by the window, sipping tea and staring at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me, a woman both exhausted and renewed. I thought about everything that had happened. The courtroom, the lies, the letters, the distance. Somehow, through all of it, I had built a version of myself that didn't need their approval anymore. But life, as always, has a way of twisting even the cleanest endings. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. Again. "Anna Parker?" The voice was unfamiliar but professional. "This is Dr. Lowell from Memorial General. I'm calling regarding your mother." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "She's been admitted for observation, stress-related complications. She listed you as her emergency contact." I went completely still. "Is she okay?" I asked cautiously. "She's stable," he said. "But she's asked to see you." Every rational part of me screamed no. I owed her nothing. I had fought too hard to escape her control. But beneath the logic was a strange, soft ache I couldn't ignore. Because for all her cruelty, she was still my mother. So I went. The hospital room was dim, the blinds half closed. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. My mother looked smaller somehow, her hair streaked with more gray than I remembered. When she saw me, her eyes widened, shock, not relief. "You came," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure I should," I admitted, setting my purse down. She tried to sit up, but winced. "You always were the emotional one." I almost laughed. Even now, lying in a hospital bed, she couldn't resist taking a jab. But then her tone shifted, barely, but enough to notice. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again," she said. "I didn't," I replied honestly. "But I guess some part of me needed to." For a moment, We just stared at each other. The silence was thick, filled with years of unspoken words.
Finally, she sighed.
I didn't mean for things to go this far. I leaned back, folding my arms. Which part? The lies? The forgery? Or the way you made me feel like I was never enough? Her eyes flashed with something, regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. I did what I thought was best, she murmured. I shook my head.
No.
You did what made you feel powerful. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. You sound just like your father. I'll take that as a compliment. For the first time in my life, I saw her speechless. Vulnerable. The woman who'd built her world on control had finally run out of defenses. I stood up, adjusting my coat. I don't hate you, I said softly. But I can't save you either. You'll have to do that yourself. She looked at me, her lips trembling. Anna. I paused at the door. I never meant to lose you, she whispered. I didn't turn around. You didn't lose me, Mom. You gave me away, every time you chose pride over love. And then I walked out. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. I exhaled deeply, my breath visible in the night air. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. That night, I called my therapist and told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just listened until I ran out of words. When I finished, she said gently, "That wasn't closure, Anna. That was transformation." And she was right, because the next morning, I woke up lighter. The fear that had followed me for years, the fear of being small, of being wrong, of not being enough, was gone. I got dressed, looked in the mirror, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. And that survival in itself was victory. Later that week, I received another email from Judge O'Neill's assistant. The subject line read, "Personal request." Inside was a short message. The judge would like to invite you to speak at an upcoming community event on resilience and justice. He remembers your testimony vividly and believes your story could inspire others. I sat there, stunned, rereading it 3 times.
Me?
The girl whose own parents rolled their eyes at her in court? The woman who'd once been too afraid to speak up? I typed my response slowly, my hands steady. I'd be honored. When the day of the event arrived, I stood backstage, waiting for my turn. My heart raced, but not from fear, from purpose. As I stepped up to the microphone, I looked out at the faces in the crowd, strangers, but in a way, familiar. People who had known betrayal, injustice, heartbreak. I took a deep breath. "My name is Anna Parker," I began, voice clear and steady. "And sometimes, the people who hurt us most teach us the most important lesson of all, that we are capable of standing alone." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, genuine, warm. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's validation. I had found my own. When the courtroom doors opened, I swear my knees almost gave out. The air was heavy, like all the unspoken words between my parents and me had followed us here, filling every inch of the room. My heart was pounding, not out of fear this time, but out of the strange calm that comes before something life-altering. I walked in with my head high, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble floor, and that's when I saw them, my mom and dad. They were sitting together in the second row, just like they always did during church, side by side, wearing their matching expressions of judgment. My mom's lips curled into that familiar, tight-lipped smile, the one she used when she didn't want anyone to see her disgust. My dad, meanwhile, leaned back with his arms folded, like he was watching a bad play he'd been forced to attend. And then they rolled their eyes. It wasn't subtle. It was synchronized, like they'd rehearsed it. The gesture was small. Maybe to anyone else it would have seemed harmless. But to me, it carried decades of dismissal. It said, "You'll never be enough." It said, "Why are you embarrassing us again?" It said everything they'd never stop saying, even when I begged them to believe in me. For a second, the old me wanted to shrink, to be that little girl again, desperate for their approval. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who had built herself from the pieces they shattered. The bailiff called out, "All rise," and we stood as the judge entered. His name was Judge Lawson, a man known for his calm demeanor and fairness. But when his eyes landed on me, something flickered across his face. Recognition.
Surprise.
Maybe even respect. He adjusted his glasses, leaned slightly forward, and said, "Miss Hayes, I wasn't expecting to see you here today." My parents glanced at each other, confusion replacing their smugness. I didn't say anything. I just smiled faintly and nodded. You see, for weeks, my parents had been under the impression that I was here because of the inheritance dispute. After my grandmother passed, there had been an argument about the property she left behind, a house that held generations of memories. My parents assumed I was contesting their claim because I wanted money. That's what they told everyone. "Emma's being greedy," my mom said. "She's trying to take what isn't hers." But that wasn't the real story. When my grandmother was alive, she'd left a letter, one only I knew about. In it, she'd written about the emotional abuse I'd endured, how she saw everything my parents did, and how she wished she'd done more to protect me. That letter wasn't just a confession. It was a legal document, written and notarized, stating that her home was to be given to the person most in need of peace. Her exact words. And Judge Lawson had been the one to notarize it. As the case began, the courtroom filled with whispers. My parents' lawyers stood up, confident, presenting their argument that I had no right to the house because my grandmother had verbally expressed her wish to leave it to her family. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, holding the envelope I had kept hidden for months. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "Your Honor," I said, "I have something that might clarify my grandmother's intentions." The judge gestured for me to continue. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, reading aloud. "To my dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to say it when I was alive. You've carried the weight of this family's cruelty for too long. This house isn't just a home. It's your sanctuary. You deserve peace. You deserve freedom. Don't let anyone take that from you again." For a moment, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of my mother's sharp inhale. My dad's jaw tightened. His face went pale. The judge took the letter, scanned it, and looked up at my parents. "This document is valid," he said firmly. "It was signed and notarized in my presence 2 years ago. Mrs. Hayes's wishes are clear." My mom stood abruptly, her voice rising. "This is absurd." She manipulated her grandmother. The judge raised his hand. "Mrs. Hayes, enough. The court recognizes this as a binding testamentary letter. The property belongs to Ms. Emma Hayes." It was done. Just like that. But the victory wasn't about the house, not really. It was about finally being seen. About the truth finally outweighing their lies. My parents were fuming, whispering harshly to each other. My mom turned toward me, her voice dripping with venom. "You've humiliated us." I looked at her and, for the first time, didn't feel small. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." She froze, not because the words were cruel, but because they were true. When the session ended, the judge stepped down from the bench and approached me privately. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," he said softly. "She told me once that she hoped you'd find peace one day. I think she'd be proud." That was the moment I felt it, the weight lifting. Years of self-doubt, guilt, and longing peeling off me like old skin. As I walked out of the courtroom, I saw my parents still sitting there, looking lost, like they didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe they didn't. I wasn't the daughter who craved their love anymore. I was someone new, someone free. Outside, the sunlight hit my face, and I closed my eyes, letting it warm me. I remembered being a little girl, sitting by the window of that same house, dreaming about escaping one day. And now, that house was mine. Not because of revenge, but because I'd finally earned peace. A few months later, I moved into the old place. It needed work, creaky floors, chipped paint, overgrown garden, but it felt right. The first night I slept there, I lit a single candle in the living room, just like my grandmother used to, and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't invite my parents over. They didn't call, and I didn't expect them to. For once, silence felt like safety. But life has a funny way of coming full circle. One afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, shaky penmanship I recognized instantly. My father's. Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. But your mother hasn't been the same since that day. Maybe it's guilt, maybe pride. Either way, I wanted to say you were right. We failed you. Your grandmother saw what we refused to. I hope the house brings you peace. Dad. I sat there for a long time after reading it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt calm. Because maybe that was my real revenge, not their regret, but my peace. I started to paint again. Something I hadn't done since college. I filled the walls with colors that spoke of healing, soft blues, muted yellows, shades that felt like breathing after years underwater. I opened the windows wide, letting in the wind and the scent of jasmine from the garden. Every creak of the old wood reminded me of the past, but it no longer hurt. It was history, and I was finally the one writing it. A few months later, I invited a few close friends over, the people who had stood by me when my family turned their backs. We laughed, shared stories, drank wine, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars, and thought about how far I'd come. My grandmother once told me, peace doesn't come from fixing others. It comes from freeing yourself. I finally understood what she meant. Maybe my parents would never apologize properly. Maybe they'd never understand how deeply they'd hurt me. But that no longer mattered. Because I had something they couldn't take away, my truth. The truth that I had survived. The truth that I had built myself alone. The truth that I didn't need their love to feel whole anymore. When I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for them, but for myself. For the little girl who once begged to be seen. For the woman who finally stopped waiting. And when the morning came, the light that spilled through the curtains felt different, brighter, softer, like a new beginning. Because in the end, it wasn't the courtroom or the letter that changed everything. It was me. I had walked into that courtroom thinking I was fighting for a house. But I walked out knowing I had reclaimed my life. And that was the real victory.